What first brought us together was our work place. We worked professionally together as custom goldsmiths.
Each of us have approached our work very much from a personal place. I believe that we've found a way to express our ideas through jewelry. We all have a common interest in nature, color, and finding a way to create contrast. So whether that's between texture or material or spaces.
Over the years, we had been sharing our inspirations and aspirations and decided that, hey, it would be really nice to come together and create an exhibition and show the diversity in what we do as individual artists.
We all come from different sets of aesthetics, and it's very obvious as you walk around the room that we don't have the same vision of nature. We don't have the same vision of detail or complexity. I think it makes it a lot more interesting coming from various directions to the same outcome. And one of those outcomes was making workable, wearable art jewelry. And I think we've been successful in that.
We've tried to stimulate conversations surrounding what art jewelry is and contemporary craft.
Looking at triadic color schemes, we've created a dialogue on there not only being 3 individual artists coming together, but it's also allowed us to represent each artist through the use of a single color. We came up with a harmonious color palette, and our curator, Tom Ferrero, had suggested that each of us be associated with one of those 3 colors. And I think that's worked really well in the space. What we've done is paint on the wall the colors around individual pieces or indicate the artist through the use of a speck of color. With this exhibition, there are distinguishable similarities between our work, and it's something that can be seen if you take a look throughout the show, things such as color and inspirations from nature and texture and form. But in general, we are all individual artists, and we have work that is very distinct through our individual aesthetics and concepts and inspirations that are coming together.
I've chosen to focus on creating forms that are reminiscent of natural organisms and harmonizing them with architectural elements, specifically Gothic architecture for this body of work. And so I've spent a lot of time at my family's cottage, and through that personal experience in the outdoors, I've made natural studies of objects found along the way, very much about making observations, and I've found that through my time there, it was appropriate to call the work excursions. The approach I take to making is to first do some sketches and also make abstract interpretations of the natural forms, and find a way to create comparisons with architectural characteristics in structure and form. And I've also incorporated some textile components. Those stemming from my background in textiles, I've found a way to incorporate texture and color in those materials. In this body of work, I've decided to group the pieces into 4 sub-series. And by titling each grouping, I've given the viewer a little bit of insight into the ideas I've explored. Specifically, I've looked at some insects and found a way to abstract the forms. Looking at the first series, I've called it Gothic Dragonfly. Looking at the dragonfly as a source of inspiration, I've also incorporated some flying buttress source of inspiration from the Gothic architecture, as well as columns. And it comes through in the way I've chosen to create interior and exterior space in the forms. Also, the second grouping is called Soaring Rambles. It stems from more of a pod-like form and taking a little bit of inspiration from rose windows and the vaulted ceilings that give the interior space that sense of light. And the third grouping is called Uplifted Undergrowth. So again, traveling along those nature trails, making observations and finding ferns along the way, or other insect exoskeletons and that type of thing. In the fourth sub-series, it's titled Curving Currents. I've created pieces that are more water-related, and stemming from my time in and around the water, I've fused that inspiration with pointed arches and using line to really emphasize some of those components. So some of the forms are also stemming from jellyfish and taking a little more of a chance to integrate some textile components as a way to contrast the more rigid metal forms, and using a little more of that textile background to heat set some of the fabric and give it a little more of its own structure.
With my art jewelry practice, I strive to blend contemporary materials with traditional materials and techniques. So in the case of this body of work, Metaphors, I have worked a lot with sterling silver and gold, as well as alternative materials such as resin and the introduction of silicone. Through the focus of this body of work being experimentation and exploration in form and design, I challenged myself to really push into introducing new forms and textures and materials to the work. And when working with these very, very different materials, precious gold, very traditional, something that I am trained in, as opposed to silicone, which is very tactile and flexible and alternative, something I've only ever used for making molds, I had to experiment a lot and figure out how the two could come together, along with the materials I normally work in, sterling silver and resin. And through all of these processes, the materials began to inform the way that I worked with each other. So one design would evolve based on the way I had discovered to work in another material. And it's this sort of unknown tension in my practice that drives me and inspires me. And I feel that from and through this experimentation, I have been able to build a body of work that will allow me to investigate these techniques and ideas further. So it's opened the door to new exploration. My work has been, for the past few years, inspired by language and linguistics, as well as the anatomy associated with sound and speech. It really inspires me to look at natural botanical objects and view them from those perspectives. So I'll often take something found in nature, something that I've discovered while on a hike or somewhere outside of my home city, and look at it from the perspective of language, looking at the form and thinking, oh, this little beautiful natural object could talk to me, or it looks like this speech organ. And what I really enjoy doing with that is fusing the two, the inspirations that I see in nature, the forms, and recontextualizing them through the use of vibrant, transparent, glass-like materials. So I've completely re-transformed this natural object into something that doesn't really look like it anymore. and then complement it through hand fabricated or cast metal components that bring the design all together.
I've chosen to depict sort of three different aspects of narrative. One are stories that I find humorous. Another would be stories that I find historically important. And the third would be personal stories that I hold close to my heart. In The Rogue Made Off with the Acorns, I have collected several stories from various people about squirrels hiding things. One story, my cousin had planted a large windbreak around their farm yard, and her son in the next summer found that all of his acorns had been dug up and they had been moved. With the second story, my boss had found that all of the peanuts around their cabin had been collected and stuffed into rubber boots in their shed. And in a third story, colleagues of mine had found under the hood of their daughter's car a huge stash of pine acorns. So she got ready to go to work and had to clear out these acorns. The following day, she was preparing for work and once again opened the hood because the motor sounded funny, and there was a whole new stash of acorns again. In St. George, I've taken my research of various versions of the story. I've collected the aspects that I feel are relevant or pertinent enough to repeat themselves in each of the stories, and then depicted them. The piece itself is a wall piece. In subsequent versions, if I get to them, they will be convertible. There are two components to this particular piece, and one would be a neck piece on chain. The other would be a pin piece. And in that case, there would be a chain linking the two components, as in a lot of the versions of the story historically. The pin could be worn with or without the neck piece. In Thai Opal, it's a personal story where I have taken my mother's fight with dementia and displayed it in a way that the forget-me-not, which is a symbol of the Alzheimer's Society, is the central part of the story. So it reminds me of my mom, her struggle, my slowly losing her. In this particular piece, that opal represents my children. So every time I wear this piece, I think my mom, my children. And I like that about jewelry because it keeps them close to my mind and my heart. We all have various stories that are close to our minds, to our hearts, and though they're personal, they are common or universal.